All right, good afternoon, and thanks for being here. This is going to be a great conversation we're going to have here, and a very important conversation, and it's called Committing to Conservation. And I want to read a little bit of what the synopsis is here so we understand what we're talking about. Environmental stewardship has become a watchword in the business sector with activists and with advocates. So corporate executives have started talking about the importance of ecosystems, regenerative agriculture, responsible product sourcing. NGOs are promoting finance mechanisms that can forgive national debt to help along with this thing. So, what does that mean and what can be done moving forward? And we have a fantastic panel here. Just to my left, Senator Bill Frist. He's also the chairman of the board of the Nature Conservancy. Jason Beckel, the CEO of Whole Foods, and Dan Barber, chef of Blue Hill Restaurant, a Michelin-starred chef. So thank you guys all for being here and for helping us out. So let's start off right at the top. And environmental stewardship, I mentioned that and I talked about that, but what does that mean and what does it particularly mean in the position you're in right now? And Jason, let's start with you in Whole Foods.
Yeah, thanks. Really happy to be here. I think it'd be just great to share a little bit. Whole Foods, we've got just over 530 stores across the U.S., Canada, and the United Kingdom. And for us, environmental stewardship has played a major role ever since we opened our first store in 1980. We've really led the way in looking at responsible, climate-friendly sourcing across our industry. We've helped lead the way within organics. We currently carry over 37,000 organic products. And for us, our higher purpose is to nourish people and the planet. And the only way that we can fulfill that is making sure that we can continue to provide our customers with the highest quality natural and organics products in the marketplace. And for our ability to do that, we need to make sure that our topsoil is in a position for us to be able to support feeding this country and well beyond for decades to come. And we see it's our responsibility to help play a role in supporting our suppliers in being able to support climate-friendly agriculture and helping be a champion in supporting the ways that we can support and serve our environment, which for us is one of our key stakeholders and part of our core values within the company.
Jason, same question here. What does that mean? Environmental stewardship, and particularly in the restaurant industry, because I think people don't necessarily equate the two hand in hand.
I'm Dan.
Dan, sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah. That's all right. I thought you were eyeballing him, giving him the question. You're going to do that. Yeah. I'm going to hand out a piece of bread to answer the question. That came from my bakery this morning, right before I hopped on the flight. We have one slice for each. Pass that down.
Let's do it.
And I'll explain. Maybe I'll answer your. Now I have this question. I can. You teed me up to describe the loaf that you're about to eat. The loaf came from a investigation I was doing about 15 years ago at a farm that I admired a lot. It was a grower named Klaus Martens who grows organic wheat in Western New York. And I went up to sort of write the recipe. How does he grow wheat that gives me the bread that I serve to my customers? Customers just adore this bread that I was serving 15 years ago. And I wanted to know, how does he do it? Because his wheat versus anyone else's just incomparable. So I get to his farm. It's about 2,500 acres. I'm looking around me. And I saw a tiny bit of wheat, but very little. Mostly what I saw is buckwheat. I saw a lot of buckwheat and barley and rye. I saw cover crops, soil leguminous crops. I saw some animals, some beef cows pasturing in some areas of the farm. I was right on a hilltop overlooking this. And what I came to realize in that moment, to answer your question, was that in supporting the wheat, in finding the recipe for the wheat, I was missing the real story, which was the whole farm. And the whole farm, from Klaus's point of view, needed to produce a heck of a lot of other crops to give me the wheat that everyone in my restaurant wanted to sell their firstborn to have another loaf, you know. And I was being celebrated as a farm-to-table, local, organic evangelist, but I was only supporting this little slice of the ecological pie of Klaus's farm. And I left that moment and changed how I operated as a chef and realized that I love good wheat. I love good king crops like corn and rice. We all do. But in order to enjoy them responsibly, we really need to eat a lot of other crops and a lot of other soil-supporting crops that have been relegated to animal feed or plowed under. And that was the lesson that I learned standing on that hilltop, that Klaus Martins, this organic farmer, he charged a lot for his wheat. But all the other crops I just mentioned, dozens of them, those soil-supporting crops that he needed to build the soil microbiology that gave me the flavor of the wheat, those are all plowed under, or he sold them for pennies per pound for chicken feed or pig feed. And it made me realize that we as eaters, but me as a chef, we needed to look at this thing very differently. And what you are eating is a loaf of bread that is made with buckwheat, barley, rye. There's a good amount of wheat in there. It's all organic ingredients, but that's it, water and salt. And what I'm trying to prove through the vehicle of bread, because if we're going to democratize these ideas and nutrition, what's better than bread in our culture? What's easier vehicle to do it than a loaf of bread, a slice of bread? And what you're eating is locked with nutrient density and I think a heck of a lot of flavor. But the responsibility is to eat the entirety of the farm, in this case, Klaus's farm. And if I can use that as a parable to answer your question, our responsibility is to eat the whole farm, the whole ecosystem, and to make sure that our diets reflect what the ecosystem needs to grow organically. And to do that, I bet we'll eat a lot more healthy. I know we're going to eat a lot more deliciously, and I believe not that far into the future, we'll eat more democratically, because Klaus doesn't need to charge so much for that wheat if he didn't have losses on all the other crops that he needs to grow to get me that wheat. And if we were paying our fair share, if we coveted those soil-supporting crops and nutritious crops and delicious crops in the way that cultures and cuisines have celebrated them for thousands of years, we would end up making the entirety of the farm equivalent. And I think that is the key to the future of regenerative farming.
And I can tell you, this bread is really good.
Thank you.
It's quite a bit of part of it. So thank you very much for bringing it here. But Bill, same question. What does that mean to you, and particularly the position you're in with the Nature Conservancy?
You know, we've heard as sort of our introduction from a business built around food and healthy foods, and a farm and a chef and the wholeness and really a holistic view. I'm going to shift just a little bit to an organization. The Nature Conservancy would define, and I would agree, that at least through our eyes, a stewardship, an environmental stewardship, would be summarized in words something like creating a thriving planet for nature and people. Really kind of, I don't know, 6, 7, or 8 words. Our mission is protecting lands and water on which all life depends. And the life is what's really important to me and to the Nature Conservancy, that we're by far the largest environmental conservation organization in the United States, by far, and the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that because the size is big. We're in 79 countries. We're in all 50 states. We're in Colorado now. We've conserved over 800,000 acres here in Colorado. In Tennessee, 500,000. We've conserved 125 million acres, all of which is good. In 350 million acres of ocean, and that's good. And I kind of want to come back to taking local to global here later in our conversation. I'm a physician, 20 years in medicine, lost my mind, 12 years, went to Washington. In the last 15 years, built healthcare companies. And as chair of the global board, our organization has about 79 countries I mentioned, 5,000 people, conserved a lot. But what's unique about it is it's not conservation just for conservation. And some people are for that, so it's nothing against that because everybody's our partners. But ours really is the people, the well-being. There's a reason for planetary health, which we've heard about, and the health of people and nature and biodiversity. So I would define it something like that, creating a thriving planet for nature and people.
And these questions that we're going to follow up with here are for all three of you. And I'm going to address it to one person, but please interject with thoughts you might have yourself. But Dan, agriculture and food production, how do they interplay with each other? Because that's a big thing right now. And I think people, when they think of environmental stewardship, they think of, what can I do to help the environment? What can I do, to recycle, to reduce, to reuse, those kind of things. But they don't typically think of, okay, the food I eat, especially if I'm going out to a restaurant, how does that interplay with everything? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a perception that we should be eating more sustainably, which means we should be eating less bad, do less harm to the environment. I think there's a way to rejig that idea and think about food production as a net ecological benefit. I know there is, and I'm saying that with the kind of confidence that you're hearing in my voice, because cultures and cuisines did that for thousands of years.
But what does that mean?
What that means is that you are celebrating a loaf of bread, but you make sure that you are eating your rye and buckwheat like you just did. If you're in Japan, you're eating 2 bowls of white rice is fundamental to Japanese cuisine and to who you are as a Japanese person. But you also eat buckwheat because buckwheat is the rotation crop historically for rice. You couldn't grow rice without buckwheat to break up disease cycles. You didn't have chemicals. So what did the Japanese do? They didn't have me pointing the finger and saying, you have to eat more buckwheat. They created soba. And so people eat soba several times a week. And another way of saying they eat soba several times a week is they get their free pass to eat a bowl of rice twice a day, 7 days a week. Same thing in global south, Mexico. It's a corn culture, but it's beans as much as corn. You couldn't grow the corn without the beans. So beans are fundamental to Mexican cooking and beyond because you literally couldn't have the king crop corn without it. The same with wheat and barley. I mean, Eastern Europe. You couldn't have your bread without your beer. Those correspondences are in every region of every culture and embedded in every cuisine. The only cuisine that it is not part and parcel of is American cuisine, if you can even call it a cuisine, because it's not really a pattern of eating. It's a hodgepodge of living high on the hog, which is what we've done for our very young country. So my prescription is to dig deeper into just simply buying organic and treating, a Whole Foods or a farmer's market like a grocery store. We need to think deeper about this and the connections that make truly regenerative food.
And Jason, especially looking at the food systems here and how it interacts with the environment and, what Dan is talking about, are we a product of our own success that food has become so plentiful because of the way it's being produced that it's continued to being produced that way and it's wrecking the environment?
I think so to some degree, and I just want to go back to a piece of what Dan was saying that I think is missing in this equation. It's making sure that all of the different stakeholders within the food system are ultimately working together and that we have an mutual understanding of what's taking place. And one of the absences we have today is the customer having a true understanding of the impact of what they're buying today and what it means for the environment and what it means for the rest of the food system. And so a lot of the ways that we've sort of tackled this problem is trying to solve things in various parts with different stakeholders. And I think one of the things that we're going to do is how do we bring this together and get folks passionate about understanding how what they eat is impacting the environment and the planet. And that's something I think we have a responsibility of helping bring that awareness to. And looking at all the different aspects of our stakeholders and how do we also incent the right behaviors here. We've got a lot of things that take place today where our farmers are not necessarily incented to help support environmentally and climate-friendly production. They look at things as a short-term decision of what's right for my family right now. And so that's something where I think if we can figure out working across our entire food system and every stakeholder for us to bring awareness and working together, we'll be able to help make better progress here.
And Bill, with the that theme in mind, and looking at the farmer who is sitting there going, I need to feed my family itself. I need to make sure I make money off these crops, and then pulling that back out to more of a global perspective. And the countries that have a lot of debt and really can't get out of that debt that they have in order to try and do something like this, how do we fix that?
Yeah, this is just a fantastic sort of setup, I think, of sort of the local and the cultural and the adaptation and mitigation. Then pull back a bit. First of all, two things. Everything's at risk. The diversity and the biodiversity is at risk when 20% of your pollinators disappear. If we don't sort of address the biodiversity, which makes all of it possible to have a healthy soil and do regenerative farming and to be able to have the panoply of options out there, the behavioral part we need to address. And the two big risks are the biodiversity risk, and that's where the Nature Conservancy puts all this size. And climate change. I mean, to take 15 minutes in and not have mentioned climate change, which is the biggest sort of existential threat to every single farmer, every single person today as we think about change and planetary health and individual health and the overlap in tying them together. So we can come back to those issues. But then let's pull back further because, and this conference is so good as we all talk to each other about the ideas. And then you wonder, well, my idea is pretty good, but how far can I go with it? And like, I love your book, and it's sort of changed culture broadly, and you're a platform of the stores, and people are going there for a reason. How do you take that and go to big scale and look at equity issues? And just a quick example. How much money does it take? We have a farm bill that's coming through. We can talk about that. But to go to really big scale and think innovatively about the ideas. An example. The Nature Conservancy 3 years ago in Belize, where I was 3 weeks ago, a country from an equity standpoint is not contributing to climate change. It's not the industry, the CO2 emissions, the automobiles, a poor country. But it is being subjected to all of the cost because it's a global phenomenon. So we at the Nature Conservancy said, we go to Belize. How can we help Belize? Belize doesn't have the money. The U.S. taxpayers should want to put the money in Belize. So what we came up with is going to really change the future. Belize has a debt, I don't know, something like $2 billion. So the Nature Conservancy went in and said, let's look at $500 million of that debt. It's called debt conversion, all of this. You come in and you take that debt, $500 million of that, which is hundreds of borrowings over time at 10%, and 15%, and 20% from around the world. And we come in, we put it together, and with the backing of, yes, the U.S. government, but no taxpayer dollars, and the international global banks, the Development Foundation, development banks, the Inter-American Development Bank, all of those, will repackage that $500 million of debt, repackage it, and certify it, and back it, and that'll save about $150 million. And what we will do is go out to the global markets, and because it's backed by the global banks, people will buy that, be oversubscribed for what are called blue bonds. Over time, the country saves about $200 million. $100 million of that goes back to them to reduce that $2 billion debt that they had, about a 12% reduction in debt, and about $100 million of that, remember, this money is just by refinancing, will go into conservation. So we'll go to Belize and say, in order to do this for you and reduce your debt by 12%, it doesn't cost you anything, we'll take care of it on the global markets. You need to spend $100 million in conserving the ocean. The largest living reef in the world is the Mesoamerican Reef off Belize. The Great Barrier Reef, a third of it's already dead. The Mesoamerican Reef has not died. So Belize, you have to do these 20 things to protect that reef. In order to reduce your debt 12%, it doesn't cost you anything. We're giving you the money to do that. That's an example of how innovation, which is really what we celebrate over these 3 days, of good ideas which we celebrate, goes to scale to alter the course in this equity world like for Belize. Since then, a similar one was done in Barbados, $150 million. And one which the Nature Conservancy, we have partners with all this, we just put it together. And it was done about 3 or 4 weeks ago in Ecuador, where I was, and that's for $1.6 billion of money to go into conservation and reduce the nation's debt at no cost to the American taxpayer or any taxpayer in the world.
And Jason, one of the things that came up earlier was talking about farming practices over the last thousands of years and how farming practices were at that point, rotation of crops was important, making sure that the land was respected and taken care of because that's what fed you and your family. Arguably over the last few decades, that hasn't been done. Are we ruining our topsoil? And if so, what do we need to do to fix that?
Well, yes, we are. And a big part of what sort of drove us into this space is the aspect of trying to serve all customers and all needs in sort of this, plentiful space of overproduction and the ability to basically mass produce, whatever sort of food products that we're looking to do.
And was one of the goals
And-
trying to get cheap food too?
Yeah, absolutely. Addressing food insecurity and reducing costs, which basically had a shadow value in the fact that we've done a lot of damage to our topsoil, and this is something where, depending upon the study you look at, there's lots of conflicting arguments. But over the next 100 years, like, we will not be able to produce many of the products that we love today in the same way going forward, because we are losing the nutrients in our topsoil. And so there's a lot of ways by which we've been trying to bring change in the space. The original movement with organic was actually aimed to try to stop some of this reversal and improve the food quality itself, in taking out many different fertilizers and different farming mechanisms that could actually be harmful to human consumption potentially. And so this is something where we had those early movements took place decades ago, but we haven't done enough for this to occur at a rapid enough pace and a large enough velocity for us to change things here in this country. And when you look at some of the next steps that are important to take, the buzzword right now is regenerative agriculture, but there's lots of steps between where we're at with organic today and things that we can continue to do to add those nutrients back into our topsoil. One of the challenges here is, like, how do you support our farmers in a way in being able to move to these practices? And so there's tons of challenges. There's issues around, like, how do you look at certifications, which there's multiple different ways that that's measured today. There's investment that needs to take place. And when you're looking at a lot of the folks who are interested in this space, they're oftentimes considered to be in the more high-risk farming production businesses. And so it's tougher for them to get loans. Right now, we're seeing unprecedented interest rates that farmers are having to pay for equipment and refinancing and capital that they need to support their businesses. And so we have to find a way to incentivize and make it easier for folks who want to do the right thing in this space, and for folks who maybe haven't been as interested in doing this, how do we move them in this direction, and understanding the important role that we need to take for future generations.
Can I put one
Definitely.
pin on what that was a great overview of what's happened in agriculture for years. I want to give one example that comes to mind. It's hard to distill these things into one example, but here's a big one. It's the cow. I mean, it's beef. In this country, it's beef. 190 million acres right now is in two crops: corn and soybeans. Corn and soybeans. That's it. That's the rotation. That's the complexity of going A to B. It cannot get more dumbed down than that. And the reason we have 190 million acres in corn and soybeans is because we want cheap beef, we demand cheap beef, and we feed a cow, which is an herbivore, which means cows are not supposed to eat grains, they're supposed to eat grass. The grass is fed by the sun feeds the grass feeds the animal feeds us. It's actually the most organic, holistic, and regenerative program ever invented by nature. And we corrupt it brilliantly, and now over 190 million acres where two crops are grown that we don't eat any of them. It is the single most wasteful food example of a food system in the history of the world. And my point, now tying back to the bread, because I want to tie back to you, Senator, you said we haven't brought up climate change. I hinted at that when I said I was looking at the top of the field. I look at all this diverse crop rotation, and I saw animals. I saw animals dotting each part of the pie, actually, and they were cows. And the point of that is that in a truly regenerative system, not only do you equate soil-building grains in a democratic way, so we have to eat them, but you also have to eat meat, and you have to eat less of it. We can't have a 6 or 7 or 8 ounce piece of protein twice a day, 7 days a week. There's no carrying capacity in the world that can fill up to that meet that, right? None. But meat's defendable, and here, your slice of bread you guys just had, I want to propose to you that was net. You did not release any carbon. In fact, you preserved carbon from being released. You were net negative So you could, that's an amazing thing to think about in that slice of bread. That in the system that I was looking at, the full complexity of the system, if we support it right, net carbon negative. And I think that is the kind of system, by the way, it produces the most delicious food, which is my ship. That's all I actually should be caring about is deliciousness. But it's true that it produces the most nutrient-dense food and the most ecologically responsible food for the future. So,
Big question here. Is this, I agree completely. Is this a race against time? And the question I'm asking is, how resilient is the ecosystem right now? Because we are batting up against some issues, climate change, the regenerative agriculture that's not working as well as we'd like it to. How resilient is the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And we all know you pay more attention to the snake that's at your foot instead of the snake that's over in the woods. I want to get to climate change because the data is so clear.
Yes.
And it wasn't 5 years ago, or some people say it was. The Nature Conservancy is of the other conservation groups, has the most scientists involved. It's one of the reasons I got involved 10 years ago with TNC. We have 900 scientists that are on the Nature Conservancy staff today. The data is so clear. So we have this course that we've created over the last 50 years, 60 years, 70 years in this country and advanced countries. Part of it is sort of predetermined and is set. The biodiversities, the pollinators, and the species lost with the birds everybody's read about is real. And that loss of biodiversity takes away the opportunity to have the farm that, I think the image is just a great one. By definition, you can't have it. So you have this inevitable trajectory. You have individuals who care about it. And the reason why I wanted to show scale quickly, because at scale, you can move things. We set 2030 targets that are really big. And if you're doing things locally, which we all try to do to protect this planet itself, it's good and it is positive in an additive way, but we all have to come together. And we have 6 goals. I won't bore you with them today, but one is we're going to take and mitigate and take carbon sequestration and avoid CO2 emissions with 3 billion tons between now and 2030. 2030 is 7 years away. It sounds like it's forever. Yeah. And it's that sort of stepwise thinking. And we have the 6 other goals, again, for the land, for the streams, for the water. Obviously, regenerative agriculture is a big part of the land, and it feeds all of the others. We include indigenous people, coming back to, I love your cultural, both in the book and your description of eating and food, our nourishment being cultural. So we tie in indigenous people, and as I said, we have a goal of 100 million people being affected by climate change to be avoided by what we collectively do with our 79 countries in setting those goals. We use nature-based solutions, and it's kind of good to talk about here. Colorado is not that biodiverse. Tennessee, ironically, has got a lot more biodiversity than here, even though we're in nature. But we look at nature-based solutions or other solutions. There's technology, we've talked about it today. On nature-based solutions, they're pretty simple. Things like reforestation, sustainable forestry. Doesn't mean you can say, no, don't touch the land. In fact, as we've seen with wildfires, which have direct impact on human health, not just where the wildfires are coming, but everywhere, that you need sustainable type caring of that. So we look at carbon sinks. We sell carbon credits. We have both in Belize and the Amazon forest. We've actually go in and protect those in a sustainable way, which allows some logging there. And right now, the nature-based, with really good care of carbon in the land, which is regenerative agriculture, and in the forest, we take about 40% of all of the bioemissions that we put up every day are taken back into the land that we're talking about and into the forest, which means we at the Nature Conservancy apply science for these nature-based solutions, which, yes, they may be just mitigation, but as we come to what could be catastrophe, I don't want to overstate it, some people do, I'm not the alarmist, but it's inevitable, and the wildfires are driving it home, and the pollution, and the asthma, and the increased heart disease, that all of that translates to is inevitably, scientifically getting worse every day. But there are these mitigating things we can do, like these nature-based solutions, which give us time to help with the technology and come back to the education, which both of them have spoken to.
And the thing I'll jump in, though, is
Please.
like, there's the stuff that we're trying to prevent in the future. We're feeling some of this pain right now. So you look at what's
But do we
happening.
know we're feeling that pain?
In some cases, yes. I think this is one of the other areas we have to do a better job of making sure we're communicating to the broader stakeholder around what's happening. I mean, we've actually taken the point in our stores to communicate to our customers when we're having impacts around quality and supply chain as it relates to flooding and fires. You take just this year, the flooding that we've seen in California has led to unprecedented challenges in things like leafy greens and strawberries. You know, I've had pictures sent in from some of our suppliers where you have fish swimming through the fields. Like, this is something that is not the situation we want to be incurring. And you're always going to have sort of ebbs and flows in this space, but the degree by which we're seeing this has been sort of unprecedented, and it is impacting. The problem is we're in a space where people will sort of just pivot to the next thing. And it's like, what's our next option? If this isn't available today, I'll pivot to something else and I'll come back to it. I think we need to make sure there's the education of this is why you're not seeing as many strawberries on the shelf, or why the quality may not be the same as what it was last season, or why these leafy greens, aren't available today.
And Dan, that brings up the point, do we need to get that message out there? And is it a message that's true that agriculture and food need to be viewed as a conservation issue?
I mean, I think it needs to be viewed as a delicious issue. And if you want to throw, it's like, I don't think it works to wag our finger, because people have to it's so hard with food. You can't get all these associations to your mom and telling you what to eat. It's like the pleasure principle has to be the guiding one. And I'm not saying that cheaply. I'm saying it for real. Like, when you have truly regenerative soil where there is a biological community that has been established, you get tastes and flavors that are unbelievably delicious. You get flavonoids, and flavonoids is flavor, and it's nutrition. It's one subject. So my shiv, my drive is through this hedonism, A to Z. That's where I like to go.
I really love that, and kind of coming out with this sort of pleasure starting, because if you make, whether it's conservation or food, if you make it a issue that doesn't have positive feedback to it, we're not gonna win.
Now,
and it's the framing of it. And obviously, you have the advantage, because literally you can hand out a piece of bread and tell the message.
Right. I got people at a table, for 2 hours.
Yeah, so
not with internet. They're actually
like
looking
that.
at each other,
Yeah.
and they're in a context of delight and pleasure. And usually they're with people they want to be eating with. I mean, seriously, we just don't have those moments.
But there's another era that you and I know, and you can comment too. And it's kind of the reason that I got, initially people said, why in the world would a former majority leader and a heart and lung transplant surgeon end up right now dedicating a big part of his life to climate change and biodiversity? Why? It really comes from a plant. When I was trying to figure out lung transplants, couldn't get the anastomosis of the lung of the main bronchus to heal. Nobody could. And I was doing heart transplants, and then a fungus, it's like the penicillin story, in Sweden was discovered. Now, the fungus wasn't discovered. I get all these things you throw in when you're talking that I think people are picking up, that this cultural stuff is hundreds of thousands and millions of years old that we're dealing with. But that fungus has been around. It was taken, it was reconfigured, and also it is the best immunosuppressant out there that made possible that bronchial anastomosis, and hundreds of thousands and millions of people are alive today because of that plant. So that's how I sort of ultimately get in there. I say all that because there's this whole world of food as medicine. And so I love the pleasure principle, but I will say, and I deal with end-of-life issues, end-stage heart disease and lung disease. If smoking is probably number one, but close to it in terms of causing the coronary artery disease and the calcification and the shortness of breath and the bronchitic emphysemic sort of changes and inflammatory response is food. It's what we eat every day.
Our current diet, exactly.
Huh?
Our current diet, exactly.
Our current diet, and the food is medicine. And so if we spend $4.5 trillion in healthcare today, and that's like a big number, but everybody here feels the cost of healthcare. You feel the morbidity, you feel the mortality, and only until the last year and a half has it ever gotten to the point that a doctor, because we weren't trained that way, recognizes the power of what you put into your body affects everything, including quality of life, how fulfilling life, how productive, how awake, how good you are in school coming in. And so this food as medicine is something that is powerful. And it's fairly new. That's why I'm not pessimistic about all this, because with the education, with the fact you're feeling these changes today, with the fact there are things that we can do today, we're not going to solve it, but everybody can do something. And food as medicine that's new is something we can continue to educate people on.
And just so everybody knows, in 5 minutes, I'm going to open up to questions. So if you have questions, please get them ready. But a big question I have for you guys, did we get lazy? Is that kind of what happened here? We got lazy and said, let's just do the quick, easy food that is fairly tasteful and maybe not delicious, but at least satisfying. And do we need to get back to kind of those older, longer routines of getting, because, I remember, my mom, my grandmother spending a lot of time making the dishes we had in the Latino community. I mean, just delicious dishes. And now it's like, I want my food 5-10 minutes.
Jason.
Yeah, I think yes. However, I don't think it has to be a compromise. I think we can find ways where we can solve a lot of these problems. We can eat better. We ultimately can support climate-friendly sourcing and responsible sourcing and growing. We can also find ways that customers can still have convenient options. I don't think it has to be a trade-off. But I think we have to work on how do we get the right solutions so we can limit the consumption on products that ultimately aren't healthy for folks, they're not healthy for the environment, and they're not great for our communities. And so I think there's a piece to say, like, how can you tie a bunch of these together? And there can still be wins around convenience for customers. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to move back to certain cooking methods or the time that you're going to prepare everything from scratch, but we can have a balance there where we can have the highest quality products that are supporting great health and environmental health at the same time.
And Dan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go specific again. I think it's seed is the issue we need to attack first.
As in plant seed.
Plant seed, because that's what's been corrupted. Everything that we're talking about, to distill it a little bit too conveniently, I admit, but if we had to, it would. Everything that's happened, the monocultures, the carbon issues, the soil degradation, the lack of democratic nutrition and flavor and pleasure, there is a string theory here, and it goes to seed. Because right now, there are 4 companies that control 65% of seed. When I say 65% of seed, I'm saying 65% of the food supply. And I'm not saying America, I'm saying the world. 65%. Is the hands of 4 companies. If we were talking just 10 years ago, it was 8 companies, 4 companies. All 4 of those companies are chemical companies, all 4. There is no longer big independent seed companies. They are all swallowed up. Bayer, ChemChina, you name it. They are all now in the hands of 4 companies. That does not conspire to the kinds of things that we are saying on this panel we need to go towards. How? If you're a chemical company and you've got the kind of power that these companies have around the world, your interest is in producing seed that is dumbed down, because you're growing in a dumbed down condition, and you make your money not on the seed. That's why all these companies went out of business. You make your money on the chemical cocktail. That's the game. It's rigged. And as much as I have been a farm-to-table advocate, and you eat 3 times, Michael Pollan always said you eat 3 times a day and you vote with your fork, and it's a very powerful vote, I don't know that I believe that anymore when you have the kind of consolidation in the industry, starting with seed, that's dumbing down genetics and owning genetics and conspiring to have an environment that is so degrading to our health and to our environment. We have to attack seed first. I think that would be my
And
first
Bill,
move.
I agree, but we can't stop there, because as you said, 8 to 4, the trends I talk about are all in the wrong direction. And then we ask ourselves, which again is the cool thing about an Ideas Festival, what do we do? And what do we do? And there are all sorts of levers, and there's the lever of policy. Right now we have a farm bill that's going through. It was just announced today it'll be delayed. We have a farm bill, which is the main conservation bill. And again, I'm not the political figure now, so I don't want anybody to start throwing anything at me. But just to share with you, because it's the sort of stuff you wouldn't know normally, or I wouldn't unless you've been through it. The farm bill is by far the biggest conservation bill. I just told you of things where the taxpayer is not involved. But you as an individual can vote, but you need to know what you're voting for and against. And you can change things. The farm bill, they're every 5 years. It's supposed to be rewritten 2023 in 4 months. It was just announced today it's going to be delayed, I don't know, a year. I don't know how long, but that's not a bad thing. It's always delayed. That's the way Washington works. But just to give you an idea, it's the biggest conservation bill that is spent in our federal government today. About $8 billion are spent every year through that farm bill around conservation. I'm not, and that includes agriculture there. Our incentives, obviously, historically have been terrible in that farm bill. But we decide as the American people, ultimately, by education, by things like this, of who makes those decisions, to get rid of the bad incentives and put positive incentives in there. And as science advances, as we have people like panels like this talking it, we do have an opportunity out there as individuals to change the course of history. And that was with HIV/AIDS 20 years ago, and it was done, and everybody said it was impossible. It was with civil rights, as we had June 10th last week, and it can be done, these big transformations. So don't sort of sit back and say, okay, it is big, and it's bad, it's getting worse, and there's nothing I can do because you can. Just let me close real quickly. There's some business people in here I know, a lot of people here are trying to get ideas to start businesses. We started a business with the private equity world and venture world that I work with around food. Social determinants of health. We know that 80% of what drives health outcomes are social determinants. A big one is food. It's been ignored in the past, which you're hearing about today. This is outside of the climate world. Yet it's a determinant of how long you live, the quality of life. It is food itself. So we started a company for medically tailored meals to go to an underserved, thinking of equity population today, our Medicaid population, and that meal is tailored to diabetes, it's tailored to heart disease, it's tailored to 13 different diseases. That idea, which started at a place like this and went through the venture capital route, is now a several billion-dollar company, serving about 80 million meals to the underserved today. And people stay on those meals for, on average, about, I don't know, I think like 6 months. So the private sector has a role as well. Private sector has gotten us to, in a bad way, I think, like on the seed thing, but also the innovation and technology out there today to address these issues is something that everybody in this room and at this conference can contribute to.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and open up for questions here.
Hello? Yes. Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm a local politician here in Colorado, and one of the challenges I've been noticing is that it's hard to get people to become passionate about conservation. They're more concerned about traffic or potholes. And so my question for you is, what strategies have you used in your areas, your industries, that have really changed behaviors or made people more aware, and not in a finger-waving way that you had said, but what has kind of worked in your areas to change that?
I'll let the burned out politician answer. And thanks for your service, by the way. It's a tough field. Just as personal, I want to jump in quickly because they're going to have much better answers. So here I am, a Republican that led the Republican Party of the United States of America in the United States Senate. And here I'm leading on climate change. I'm a scientist too, so that's why in part I'm there. But I have to go into rooms where people are, you got your alarmist on one side of the world's going to end in 5 years, and you got your deniers over here. And so how do I approach it? One of it is what I implied coming in. A lot of what we say is sort of the implications. You got the science and where the planet is going here, but what if people, the planet's too big. I can't go out and save the world. But when you link it to people and you link it to health and their well-being and their kids and growth and how well they do in school, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about food here mainly, but it goes beyond food. So somebody like me, when I'm going into a room, I will say, I mentioned wildfires, I mentioned asthma, I mentioned your heart disease. 50% of people have heart disease. And I just mentioned that the number of pollutants in the air are making your heart disease go faster, that angina that you're having. And then very quickly I said that global warming increases the number of pollutants in there, and a wildfire within 500 miles will increase it 20-fold. And oh, by the way, the wildfires are in part caused by climate change themselves and a lack of attention to this planetary health. And oh, by the way, we've got this biodiversity issue. Now, you're the politician, so you know, but what I've taken you for something you care about, your children, your family, your health, drew the acute disease, the chronic disease, the vulnerable populations, the mental health aspect of climate change and environment, and very quickly you're in the climate arena. That's the way I do it, and that's the way I go around the world trying to do it. it's the truth and it's science itself. Yes, that's the big issue. So the real answers are what?
I mean, people want to be fulfilled. And so part of it is ultimately having them understand how the decisions they're making, they can have a positive impact. And one of the ways they can be fulfilled is by making decisions that can lead to good and positive outcomes, and being able to help provide that connection where it doesn't seem preachy or it's forced upon them. An example I'll give is we have something called Source for Good. So it's products that we have throughout our stores where our customers can understand if they buy these products, they know that it's going to be supporting the environment. They know that it's going to be supporting the communities and fair trade of where those products are being grown. In the case, if you go to Whole Foods and buy Earth bananas, we're partnering with Earth University, where when you're buying those products, in addition, they're helping support students from around the world who are helping look at ways to evolve the way that we're going to support the environment going forward, and especially within the food system space. And our customers tell us they feel great about making those decisions. And again, it's not about us pushing on them, it's about providing that education, and they feel fulfilled by helping make decisions like that.
Dan?
I don't think I have anything more valuable to add than those two things.
Excellent, perfect. All right,
You have the advantage of food.
Yeah.
I have to walk people through all this disease stuff. Here's all you got to do.
especially the delicious part.
I love it. I love it.
Right here.
This was really delightful and made me very hungry. My first comment is to Dan. I would like to try a slice of the bread. But the other thing is that you touched on a couple of things. And when my mom visits from India, she's always surprised because she's like, this is not the season for this food. How can you go to the grocery store and buy okra? Because this is not the season for okra. And the reason is not just your crop rotation, but your physiological health. Certain foods were meant to be eaten during certain seasons because that's how our hormones work, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. And the other point you made about pleasure, right? I'm sure our families say, never sit to eat a meal when you've had a fight or when you're stressed. People give thanks, we pray. It's because you're bringing your heart rate from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic system. And so my question is, 30% of the food that we grow in this country never makes it to someone's plate. And what do you guys want to comment about that? Because that adds to the carbon burden and the sort of health equity issues.
Yeah, it adds to the equity. It's the equity issue, the cultural issue. So the way I do it is go straight to the healthcare industry. The healthcare, it seemed I talked a little bit about it, but the healthcare sector is 20% of our economy in terms of dollars spent, 19%. But our job in the healthcare sector, you and me and the sector out there, is to promote health, to promote well-being. That's why we take an oath, do no harm. It's why we're in there. Yet we're responsible for 12% of the bioemissions in the world today. So a great place to start is the healthcare arena itself, where the waste is probably even 35% because there's so many meals that are being served, and it's not necessarily what people ask for, and it may not be the most tasteful food that is there. And that's where I actually start, and then I go straight to the science behind it.
Yeah, we're in the process right now of trying to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2030. This is an area that's actually disrupting many of the different pieces and creating more challenges into what we were talking about earlier. One of the things that we have to figure out is how do we make sure that we are not overproducing at the same time, which some of the parts that we mentioned earlier, it's like by having all of this choice, all of this redundancy built in, we're actually overproducing. And what's even more concerning is
That's
how much
why
of
you're
this...
not a politician, because you can't say that as a politician, but as a businessman, you can say that, and that's right. That's the truth.
Yeah. And it's you've got the stuff that's actually not leaving our fields, which is one challenge. The worst part is what's ending up in our landfills on top of it. So this is something where food waste, personal passion of mine, there's so many different issues that really tie into where we have so many folks who are food insecure today. We have issues that we're creating and making things worse on the environmental side of it. And at the end of the day, the capacity we're taking on growing this, going back to many of the points that Dan mentioned, this is actually creating a flywheel of more issues that we've got going along. So this is something we ultimately have to bring greater awareness to, and solving this will actually solve some of the other challenges.
It's hard to add to those two, but I'll say this, and I don't mean it hard-hearted, okay, hard-headed, and that's that I don't love the obsession with the 30% that's wasted in the field or on our plates, though, or the bruised apple that we don't pick and throw away, though it's very important. I'll tell you why. because I think it pales in comparison to the 190 million acres of corn and soybeans that we're funneling through our meat. What I mean to say is our diets are the most wasteful diets in the history of the world. And if we don't fix that, this other stuff, we're just chipping away and we're wasting time. And time is the environment again and our health. If you look just back at the field that we started with, 90% of Klaus's 2,000 acres goes to feed animals because there's no market for those soil supporting grains. None, zero. That's wasteful. If we could take the 190 million acres and introduce a buckwheat rotation or a barley, we know that introducing a barley rotation into corn and soybeans cuts down carbon emissions by 45%. One rotation. You add in buckwheat, you add another 10 to 20%. Right like that, just off the bat. We need to create a market for those. And that, instead of funneling some of the most productive and important farming land and soil in the world through an animal that's not meant to eat it and inefficiently eat that meat, we ought to be thinking about how to look at grains. I'm obsessed with grains in this context, this conversation, because it's 68% of our farmland. 68%. Vegetables is 6%. Flowers is 5%. Like, it is grains. If we don't fix grains, we don't stand a chance at health, at the environment, and waste.
I want to thank the three of you. Unfortunately, our time is up. We could talk about this for a much, much longer time, but it's been committing to conservation. You guys have come up with some great dialogue here today, and thank the audience for being here with us as well. And hopefully, we've planted a seed here at Ideas Festival. You like the way I did that?
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.